In this tutorial, I'll show you the basics of 3D modeling. We'll discuss how to use 3D primitives and 2D objects as a modeling starting point. We'll then go over some of the additional modeling techniques to do more complex modeling. Design 3D offers multiple modeling methods. These include solid modeling using Boolean operations, metasurface modeling with 3D primitives and polygon mesh objects using the meld command, spline surface modeling, which will be familiar to Adobe Illustrator users, and subdivision surface modeling based on polygon objects. There are also a variety of specialty objects that have their own modeling controls. These include text objects, extruded objects, skin objects, and lathe objects. Let's get started with 2D objects to create some of these specialty objects. First, we'll draw in a small rectangle. We'll grab the Extrude tool and extrude it upward. Looking at the Object Properties palette, you can see that this special object type has its own controls in the Object panel. We can change the bevel width, and there are several other controls for an extrude object. If we select the Move tool and then double-click on the extrude object, we can do an isolation edit. You'll note that the tool palette changes to only provide tools that apply to this edit session. Here we can alter the bevel outline of the object. You can exit any editing mode by clicking on the Edit button at the top of the tool palette. You can also click on that button to enter an edit mode instead of double-clicking on the object if you prefer not to edit in isolation mode. Starting again with the rectangle, let's give the Lathe tool a try. You can see that I can drag one of the handles of a 2D object to spin the object around the opposite axis. You can lathe the object 360 degrees or any other amount. Again, you can see this special object type has its own controls in the object properties. And if you were to edit the object in editing mode, you'd see several ways to alter this lathed object. Experiment for yourself with other special object types, such as text and path extrude. You'll find details on how to create, edit, and use these object types in the user guide. You can use 3D objects as a starting point for modeling too. First, let's review the ways you can place a 3D object into your model. We'll start with the Cube tool and draw a cube on the active grid. If I click down and then drag the mouse, you'll notice that I can draw the cube in any proportion, so long as the base stays stuck to the grid. Next, I'll draw a cube, but this time I'll hold down the Shift key as I click and drag. Notice how the cube is constrained to be even on all sides. This time, I'll hold down the Option key. Notice how the cube is drawing from the center. I'll draw another cube, but this time, I'll use the 3-click method. Instead of dragging, I'll click down once. This establishes a starting point for the cube. Next, I'll do a second click. This establishes the base rectangle for our cube. If we were drawing a 2D object, this second click would finish the object. But for a 3D object, there's one more click to go. You'll notice that as I move my mouse, the cube grows up and down relative to the grid. You'll also see a temporary guide showing us the single direction that we can now move the top surface of the cube. I'll click here to finish my cube. Now let's turn on Snap to Grid from the View menu. Notice how when I draw in with the 3-click method, the surfaces are snapping to the 1-inch increments of the grid. These snap increments can be changed using the Set Units dialog. All of these methods, click and drag to draw, using the Option key to draw from the center, holding the Shift key to constrain proportions, the multi-click drawing, and the Snap to Grid, these work for all of the 2D and 3D objects. I'll draw in another cube. Next, I'll draw in a sphere. Using these two objects, I'll demonstrate some of the modeling techniques we discussed. First, we'll select the Boolean Subtract tool. By dragging from the sphere to the cube, I can cut the sphere shape away from the cube. I'll rotate it a bit to the right, and then I'll turn on Live Ray to give us a better idea of what the new object looks like. By the way, I've set up this model with a ground plane and applied a texture to it that's just a simple gray color with the reflectivity turned up a bit. I'll use the unboolean command to restore these two objects. Now we can take these same objects and combine them with the meld command. Notice how the two objects have joined into one. As the live ray rendering progresses, you'll notice how meld creates a smooth mathematical object that's only approximated when it's rendered in polygons. If I go to the Object Properties palette, I can drag this slider to alter the meld influence between the objects. In this next section, I'll show you how to model using spline and subdivision surfaces. This time, we'll draw in both objects first, then edit them. For spline surfaces, we'll start with a sphere. I'll use the three-step method to draw it in. You can see that Snap to Grid is on. For subdivision surface modeling, we'll use a cylinder. Again, using the three-step drawing method, I'll draw in a cylinder that's about the same size as the sphere. I'll turn off Snap to Grid so that we can have more freedom when we edit these objects. Now I'll select the sphere so we can get started with spline surfaces. I'll use the Convert menu to change the sphere into a spline object. As you can see, with the Convert menu, you can change an object from one type of surface to another. In this case, we'll change the sphere into a spline surface. I'll take the sphere into an edit session. Before, when I did this, I double-clicked the object. This time, I'll click on the Edit button at the top of the tool palette. Instead of opening a new window, we're now editing in the same window. This can be important if you want to edit an object in context with other objects in the scene that you're not editing. You'll notice that again, the tool palette has changed to show new tools specific to editing the type of object we've selected. In this case, a spline surface. These spline surfaces are the same type of spline you're probably used to with Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop paths. You can see that when I select this handle on the left side, that we get spline control arms as you would normally expect in a 2D spline. Only now there are two control arms, one for each direction of the spline surface. If I move this control handle, you can see the surface indent just a bit. If I select the top spline handle and move it, you can see that it maintains its relative distance to the active grid. It isn't moving up, but up is what I want. So I'll just undo this last operation and change tools to the Move Normal tool. Normal is a term used in 3D graphics to indicate the direction perpendicular to or away from the surface. Now I can easily move the point upward. Lastly, we'll demonstrate the subdivision surface editing techniques. I'll exit out of the spline editing mode using the button at the top of the tool palette. Let's convert this cylinder into a polygon mesh object. I'll select the Convert button and select Polygon Mesh. I'll click on the Edit Object button to go into an editing session. You can see that there are quite a number of new tools added that are specifically for editing a polygon surface. Many of these tools have pop-up tool menus and different versions based on whether we're editing faces, edges, or points. Points are referred to as vertices or a vertex in Design 3D. At the top of the palette are three buttons that let you switch between those three face, edge, and vertex modes. Right now we're in face mode. With the Magic Wand tool, we can select a number of faces so we can edit them at the same time. I'll double-click to edit the tool settings. There are many adjustments that can be made to the tool, but for now I'll just set it up so it skips every other face. I just click on one of the faces here, and you can see that the alternating faces are selected. Now I'll choose the Extrude Normal tool. This is a variation of the Extrude tool, but this version extrudes each selected face directly outward. The real power in polygon editing is when you use subdivision surfaces. You can select Subdivide from the Modeling menu, or click on this button in the button bar. Notice how the object is now constrained to be inside the polygon cage we've been editing. I'll extrude the faces one more time. Now I'll grab the Rotate tool and rotate these selected faces. I'll use the Scale Normal tool to scale each of these faces smaller. Now I'll switch to the normal alternate version of the Rotate tool and twist each of these faces a bit. If I switch to Edge mode, each of the tools changes functionality so that they are specific to working with edges. The same goes if I switch to Vertex mode. The polygon subdivision surface editing method is so powerful The Strata 3D University has hours and hours of video tutorials dedicated just to this one method of modeling. You can model anything from complex product designs to more organic surfaces that you might find in nature. I'll exit out of the editing mode by clicking on the button at the top of the tool palette. Now I'll drag and drop a couple of textures onto these objects, unhide the two models based on the work we were doing earlier, and turn on Live Ray just for fun so we can see what we've thrown together. We've only been able to scratch the surface in this tutorial. Be sure to check out the user guide for more modeling information. You can find the guide from the Help menu of Design 3D or from the Getting Started dialog. And remember, there are excellent modeling tutorials, complete with starter model files, on the Strata 3D University.